Hey, it's Joe Bartle from RotoWire, and today I'm going over the 3 players I love and hate for this week. Now, the idea is to not just give you the obvious targets in both scenarios. We'll do our best throughout the season to identify players that are going to matter and have some value to you from a love perspective, and also consequential decisions for the hate players. So we'll start first with some players I like this week. How about Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback for the Miami Dolphins? I don't know what league that you might be in, where even in a spot that you're considering starting the Dolphins quarterback, but I do think he's going to do better than a lot of people expect. Let's go over this. I mean, Tua was drafted lower in fantasy leagues, realistically, because you're factoring in the injury concerns, and rightfully so, for Tua. It's possible that he misses a month plus. If a concussion happens, we have no idea how long he could miss time. But for right now, he's healthy week 1. Right now, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are both healthy. Devon Achane should play. This offense is probably at its best week 1, and I think the Colts are going to be in contention for one of the worst records in the NFL this year. They're in a dome. This should be an offensive situation overall where Tua will be successful. Again, he's healthy this week, which means you can play Tua potentially this week. I would rather play Tua over Michael Penix or Caleb Williams or J.J. McCarthy easily, and I'd probably think about Tua starting over Justin Fields as well week 1. So just consider Tua's injury prone, but he's not injured this week and probably needs to be in consideration as a top 12, 14 play. Another player I like is Jalen Warren, running back for the Steelers. Now, I'm not going to fall for the depth chart baloney that we've seen over the past 72 hours or earlier this week. I maintain that Caleb Johnson is still going to fill that Najee Harris role that we saw throughout all of last season, the past couple of years back in Pittsburgh. But matchups, they matter. And I do think we can acknowledge Jalen Warren is going to probably see more time on the field over the first month of the season. Because Caleb Johnson wasn't trained to be a pass blocking specialist in Iowa. He was meant to be a thoroughbred runner and is going to have to be asked to do new things in the NFL. And also, Jalen Warren's really just good at pass block. You think about this Jets defense, that Steelers-Jets game overall is one of the lowest total points projected by Vegas on the week 1 slate, and probably rightfully so. If we can acknowledge that Caleb Johnson isn't going to be an elite pass blocker right away, and we can also acknowledge that Aaron Rodgers needs that role in this offense, given that he is not very mobile at this point of his career, then we can acknowledge that Jalen Warren has to be on the field. There is zero reason to give any defense, especially one as good as the Jets, a tip-off as to what the play is going to be. Think back to Justice Hill with the Ravens last year. When Justice Hill was on the field, he was going to catch a pass. When Caleb Johnson's on the field, at least early on, you'd have to assume he's going to be getting a carry. Otherwise, why else is he out there? So for that reason alone, I'm expecting something like 40-plus offensive snaps for Jalen Warren. And in that scenario, when it's just DK Metcalf and Jonnu Smith and nothing else, if Rodgers is going to pass something around 30 attempts in a game, Jalen Warren probably is going to vacuum up 4 or 5 or 6 targets. And in full-point PPR leagues, that adds up really quickly. I'd rather play Jalen Warren over J.K. Dobbins, over Tyrone Tracy, obviously over Cam Scatterbo as well. Anyone in the Jacksonville or Cleveland backfield, Jalen Warren is an automatic play over those guys. Finally, the last player I love this week is Khalil Shakir. Maybe people that are listening to this video are in too deep of leagues where it really matters, but I'm seeing Khalil Shakir ranked outside of like the top 40 as if he doesn't have an ankle at all, much less that he is going to be healthy, has been practicing, and should play week 1 against the Ravens. Baltimore secondary got better overall as the season progressed last year, and they added Jair Alexander. I don't know if he ends up playing this week, but I don't know if it really matters. There's a reason Vegas has this game, the Ravens and Bills, as the highest over-under of the week 1 slate. There's going to be points scored, plenty. If there's as much offense as Vegas seems to assume, and I think that's probably true, Khalil Shakir is basically guaranteed to be a top 30 fantasy receiver in full-point PPR leagues. And he probably should push for, I would say, the floor, 6 catches, 60 yards, in that range. There might be a period of time later in the season where Gabe Davis or Keon Coleman becomes that number 1 receiver, or that Joe Brady, offensive coordinator for the Bills, wants to use a guy in that capacity, but it won't be week 1. And so long as Khalil Shakir is healthy, he needs to be the de facto number 1 target in an offense that we think, again, Vegas does too, will score a lot of points. I would rather play Khalil Shakir over Cooper Kupp, Rome Odunze, possibly even Calvin Ridley too in a tough matchup against the Broncos. And I think you go even further over guys like Deebo Samuel as well. I think Khalil Shakir is on the fringe of a flex or wide receiver play this week. Hey, while you're here, please like and subscribe to the video. That'd be really awesome. I'm going to be doing these each and every week, and we have lots of different videos overall on the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube channel and the RotoWire YouTube channel as a whole. It'd also be great if you could subscribe to RotoWire. Right now, you can get a 15% discount on a RotoWire subscription. Just enter YouTube 15. You'll be able to see a lot of content on the site from me as well. The waiver wire article updated daily on rotowire.com. And also, I'll be picking every game against the spread and every total up live on RotoWire right now. You can see on my Twitter, JB Fantasy Sports too, but just throw us a subscription if you can to RotoWire, which has a lot of great content all throughout the week. Let's move over to 3 players I hate, and we'll start first in a matchup overall that I think is going to be very difficult. Tony Pollard for the Titans. This probably isn't fair because you drafted Tony Pollard late, like round 6, round 7, and he's cheap enough where in that situation, if he's operating as running back 2, you're probably playing him regardless. But we know the history, specifically of rookie quarterbacks in their first start, and this Broncos defense is absolutely legit. I like Cam Ward a lot, certainly more than it feels like the rest of the NFL wants to acknowledge. But at the same time, the Broncos defense being really good, the Broncos offense can generate enough points, and Cam Ward in his first start, it just seems like it's adding all up for the Titans offense to really struggle in week 1. At this point, it's going to be a matter of if you're playing Tony Pollard for volume, because if he ends up getting something like 20 touches, both as a rusher and a receiver, then you're probably comfortable with that play. But it certainly isn't because he's going to be scoring lots of touchdowns and probably isn't accumulating yardage either. So the easier play might be if you have to start Tony Pollard in your fantasy leagues to either bet the Titans under on total points if you are in a state that's legal to do so, or even just take like Titans first drive to be a punt, because then you're evening it out in the situation that Tony Pollard likely struggles in this difficult matchup. So I'd rather play Isaiah Pacheco. I'd rather play both the Viking running backs, Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, and I'd probably even consider playing someone like Nick Chubb over Tony Pollard this week. Sticking in the same matchup flip side, though, I don't know if I'm really in on Courtland Sutton, and I have some reservations overall about Denver's offense just the entire year. I was a little bit lower on Bo Nix than the rest of my colleagues at RotoWire, but just this week, from a game script perspective, I don't know in which scenario Courtland Sutton becomes a top 10, top 15 sort of guy. Now, Courtland Sutton quietly was that last year, given touchdowns, and maybe that's the reason he'll do so again this week. But if you think about how the Broncos want to win this football game, you want to limit mistakes, make sure you're not making aggressive plays, don't want to give the Titans advantageous field position. It's going to be a grind and a struggle for Cam Ward in his first start. So in that scenario, it's probably J.K. Dobbins and mixing in R.J. Harvey, and maybe there's some dump-offs for Evan Ingram for 5 yards. The game script would say Courtland Sutton is not going to be involved to a super big extent. And if the Broncos end up winning by 3 scores, it could be like 17-0, not 38-17. So in that scenario, I think Courtland Sutton's outside my top 24, outside my top 30. I'd rather play Xavier Worthy. I'd rather play Chris Olave. I'd certainly rather have Zay Flowers, Emeka Egbuka, Ricky Pearsall. Any one of those hot round 6 through 8 receivers are probably a play for me this week over Courtland Sutton. Finally, I'm a little bit lower on Sam Laporta, at least compared to the rest of my colleagues. I'm a bit hesitant to put him in here because outside of George Kittle, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, any tight end, especially one in a good offense, probably is functioning and fine. But last year, he only averaged 3 receptions for 42 yards in the 2 contests against the Packers defense. We think the Packers defense theoretically will be better, even without Micah Parsons. The year 2 Jeff Hafley system we believe is going to be better, and the Packers have been really good in home openers. Does that matter? I don't know, but I do think assuming the Ben Johnson offense will just be replicated right away in week 1 for a new offensive coordinator isn't the right assumption. With a full assortment of healthy weapons for the Lions and a bit of a shoddy offensive line, I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Laporta is asked to be a blocker earlier this season. I'd rather play Evan Ingram. I'd rather play Tucker Kraft over Sam Laporta, and I would probably look at guys like Tyler Warren or Jake Ferguson as well, too. If Sam Laporta scores a touchdown, obviously he's a fantasy play, but the issue is that a lot of these other guys will have probably more volume than Sam Laporta, at least in week 1 against the Packers.